There's a special kind of silence that only exists in an operating room. It's not an absence of sound, but a shared, hyper-focused breathlessness where the rhythmic beep of monitors and the soft hum of ventilation are the only things that matter. I had lived in that silence for a decade, mastering it, bending it to my will to save lives. That's what I was born to do. But the loudest silence I ever experienced wasn't in a sterile white room. It was the one that fell over the hospital board when I handed in my resignation. My father-in-law, the hospital's director, scoffed. He actually laughed. He told me I was being emotional, that I was irreplaceable here, and that I would never find a better home. He didn't understand that I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving the battlefield where I had fought and bled for a family that had just stabbed me in the back. I had spent my life building a surgical program that was my pride and joy, a legacy for a hospital that I thought was my home. My hands, which had meticulously repaired the tiny, fragile hearts of children, had now signed the document that would unravel everything he had built. He thought it was a bluff, a petty act of a spurned employee. He thought I was just throwing a tantrum, but he hadn't read the final report that was tucked inside that envelope. He hadn't understood that a surgeon isn't just their hands. They are their mind, their team, and their reputation. And I was taking all of it with me. The look on his face, when the truth finally dawned on him and the laughter died in his throat, was a priceless masterpiece of panic. It was the moment he realized he hadn't just lost a surgeon. He had lost his future. And that was just the beginning. My life, before all this, felt like a perfectly orchestrated ballet. Every movement, every step was precise, practiced, and leading towards a grand finale I had been promised. I was Dr. Amelia Chen, and my stage was the state-of-the-art operating theater at Vance Medical Center. My life was defined by the relentless pursuit of perfection, a marathon of medical books, sterile corridors, and the delicate dance of a scalpel in my hand. For a decade, I had been the silent engine of the pediatric surgery department, the one who took on the impossible cases, the one who stayed up all night to save a child's life, and the one whose reputation brought in the most complex referrals. My husband, Dr. Leo Vance, was the hospital's head of administration. He was the son of the founder, Dr. Arthur Vance, a man whose name was etched in marble at the hospital's entrance and whose legacy was the very air we breathed. My marriage to Leo had felt like a perfect union of two people dedicated to the same cause. We met in med school, and our connection was instant, a shared ambition, a mutual respect for the grueling demands of our profession. When I joined the Vance family, I didn't just marry Leo, I married into the hospital. It was a family affair, a kingdom built on the Vance name, and I was proud to be its queen, or so I thought. Arthur, my father-in-law, was a titan. He was a man of firm handshakes, booming laughter, and a presence that could fill any room. He had a way of making you feel like you were part of something bigger, something important. He'd often pat me on the back and say, "Amy, you are the heart of this hospital. We wouldn't be where we are without your hands." And I believed him. I believed him when he told me the title of head of pediatric surgery was mine, that it was just a matter of time. I believed him when he said my dedication and my groundbreaking research into non-invasive surgical techniques were the future of Vance Medical Center. The truth was, I wasn't just a surgeon, I was an innovator. For 5 years, I had led a research team, working in the hospital's off hours to develop a new surgical method. It was a risky, unconventional approach that promised faster recovery times and less trauma for our youngest patients. My research was my baby, my intellectual property. And Arthur was well aware of its potential. He had been a vocal supporter, promising all the necessary resources once my final paper was published. He called it our shared legacy, and I naively let that idea take root in my heart. The first crack in my perfect world wasn't a sudden earthquake, but a series of subtle tremors. It began with Charlotte, Leo's older sister. She was a brilliant but volatile general surgeon, known for her sharp tongue and an ego that often eclipsed her talent. Her marriage to a pharmaceutical executive was a constant source of gossip in the hospital corridors, a volatile blend of public displays of affection and hushed fights. For a while, Charlotte's life seemed to be spiraling. Her husband was rarely seen at hospital functions, and she started showing up to work visibly shaken. I felt for her. Despite our professional rivalry, she was family. Arthur's attitude toward Charlotte shifted. He became protective, almost desperate to keep her close. I would hear them behind closed doors, Arthur's voice low and firm, Charlotte's often raised in a tearful protest. The whispers began to circulate. Charlotte's marriage was on the rocks, her husband was threatening to leave, and she was on the verge of a breakdown. The hospital, our family, became her sanctuary, and Arthur was her fierce protector. Around this time, the promises Arthur made to me became less frequent, more vague. I'd ask about the timeline for the head of department position, and he would wave a dismissive hand. Patience, my dear. These things take time. The board has a lot on its plate. I ignored the subtle shift, attributing it to the stress of running a major hospital. I kept my head down, focusing on my work, on my patients, and on the final stages of my research. Then came the meeting. It was a crisp Tuesday morning. I was preparing for a delicate 10-hour surgery, my hands already gloved, and my mind in a state of focused calm. I got a text from Leo. Urgent board meeting, cancel your surgery. Dad insists you be there. My heart sank. Canceling a scheduled surgery was a cardinal sin, an act of professional recklessness. But this was an order from Arthur. The boardroom was a stark, mahogany-paneled chamber where life and death decisions were made daily. But today, it felt different. The air was heavy with an unspoken tension. The board members, a mix of seasoned doctors and powerful financiers, sat in a solemn semicircle. Arthur stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of practiced professionalism. I took my seat, right next to Leo, whose knuckles were white as he gripped his coffee mug. His eyes met mine, a silent, weary apology passing between us. I knew then that this was not a meeting about budget cuts or new equipment. This was about me. Arthur began, his voice surprisingly soft. We're here today to discuss the future of our pediatric surgical department. For years, we've been blessed with an incredible talent pool, a team of dedicated professionals. But the time has come to consolidate our leadership, to appoint a new head who will not only lead us into the future, but also represent the enduring values of the Vance family. He spoke of dedication, of legacy, of family. Every word felt like a perfectly placed brick on a wall being built between me and my dream. My heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked around the room. The board member's eyes flickered between me and Charlotte, who was sitting across the table, her face a mixture of triumph and shame. My mind, trained for a decade to process information with cold, surgical precision, pieced it all together. The hushed conversations, the vague promises, the desperate need to find a new purpose for his eldest daughter. It is my great honor, Arthur announced, his voice regaining its booming confidence, to appoint the new head of pediatric surgery, Dr. Charlotte Vance. The room erupted in polite, measured applause. The sound was a ringing in my ears, a high-pitched drone that blocked out everything else. I stared at Arthur, then at Charlotte. She didn't meet my gaze. She just sat there, a hollow, victorious look on her face. My hands, which had been resting calmly in my lap, felt cold and distant, as if they no longer belonged to me. The world tilted on its axis, and I suddenly felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a career setback. It was a betrayal of the highest order. It was a message, delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. I was a tool, a means to an end, and when a more pressing family need arose, my decade of sacrifice would be cast aside without a second thought. The final act of the ballet had begun, but it wasn't the beautiful finale I had envisioned. It was a tragedy, and I was the unsuspecting victim. The applause for Charlotte felt like a physical blow. The polite clapping of people who knew the truth but were too complicit to speak it. I sat there, frozen, the sterile air of the boardroom suddenly feeling like a suffocating blanket. Leo reached for my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to stay calm, to not make a scene. But all I could feel was the bone-deep coldness of betrayal. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a public declaration that my hard work, my dedication, and my undeniable achievements meant less than the emotional well-being of the Vance family's troubled daughter. Charlotte stood up, her smile brittle, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, but her hands were shaking slightly as she clutched a printed speech. "Thank you, Father, and thank you, everyone," she began, her voice a little too high, a little too strained. "I know I have big shoes to fill, and I'm so honored to lead this incredible team. I look forward to learning from all of you, especially from Amy's amazing work." The words, "learning from Amy," were the final, cruel twist of the knife. I was not to be a leader. I was to be a mentor. I was expected to graciously hand over the keys to a kingdom I had built with my own hands and then stand by, a dutiful subject, as someone else took the throne. My research, my groundbreaking surgical techniques, my team, all of it was now Charlotte's to inherit. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. The room went silent. Arthur's face tightened, a look of warning in his eyes. He thought I was about to cause a scene, to lash out in anger. He expected a predictable, emotional outburst. But a surgeon's training teaches you to compartmentalize, to put emotion aside in a moment of crisis. My hands were steady. My voice was low and even. "Congratulations, Charlotte," I said, a smile that didn't reach my eyes playing on my lips. "I wish you the best of luck." And then, without another word, I walked out. I walked straight back to the operating room. The surgery I had canceled was for a little girl named Lily, who needed a complex heart valve repair. My hands were itching to get back to work, to get lost in the familiar rhythm of sutures and scalpels. But the team, still in their scrubs, looked at me with a mix of pity and discomfort. My head nurse, Maria, a woman who had been by my side for 8 years, gently took my arm. "Amy, what happened?" she whispered. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I walked to the scrub sink and began the ritual of washing my hands, the warm water and antiseptic soap a familiar comfort. As I scrubbed, I caught my reflection in the steel-plated mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, a shell of the confident, ambitious surgeon I had been just an hour ago. She was tired, defeated, and for the first time in her life, profoundly lost. That night, the silence at home was deafening. Leo was apologetic, but his words felt hollow. "I tried, Amy. You know I did. But Dad was set on this. He said Charlotte needed this, that her marriage was falling apart, and he couldn't stand to see her so unhappy." His voice was full of a pathetic empathy that only fueled my rage. "So, I'm supposed to sacrifice my life's work for her happiness?" I asked. my voice dangerously calm. My career, my research, my future. All of it is a footnote in your sister's personal drama? Leo didn't have an answer. He was caught between his wife and his father, a position he'd been in his whole life, and he always chose his father. I realized then that my marriage was not a partnership of equals, but a precarious truce I had naively believed in. I was an asset to the Vance family, a prized racehorse, but in the end, I was just a possession to be used and discarded when it suited them. The next few weeks were a surreal blur. I went to work, trained Charlotte, and maintained a facade of stoic professionalism. I walked her through my research, handed over my patient files, and introduced her to the key hospital board members. Charlotte, for her part, was overwhelmed and clearly out of her depth. She asked me basic questions, stumbled through meetings, and deferred to my judgment at every turn. It was a painful, humiliating process. I was a ghost, haunting the halls of the department I had built, watching as someone else fumbled with my legacy. But beneath the surface of my calm, something new was taking shape. It wasn't the hot, blinding anger I had felt in the boardroom. It was a cold, calculating fury that was far more dangerous. Every time Charlotte asked a question, every time she made a clumsy mistake, I took a mental note. Every time Arthur praised her fresh perspective, I felt a knot of resolve tighten in my chest. They saw me as a placeholder, a temporary caregiver for their precious family heir. But they didn't know that my quiet demeanor hid a mind sharper than any scalpel, a mind that had already begun to dissect their betrayal and plan its methodical revenge. I started a new habit. Every night, after Leo had gone to bed, I would sit at my home office desk. I wasn't just a surgeon. I was a scientist, a researcher, and a meticulous documentarian. I began to write, not a resignation letter full of angry accusations, but a comprehensive report. I detailed every one of my achievements, the number of successful surgeries, the specifics of my groundbreaking research, the grants I had secured, the talent of the team I had built. I didn't just write about the past, I wrote about the future. I laid out a complete strategic plan for a new surgical center, one that would leverage my new techniques and attract top-tier talent. This wasn't just a fantasy. It was a detailed, meticulously planned blueprint for a medical revolution. My work wasn't just about my career. It was about protecting my team. Maria, my loyal head nurse, had a son to put through college. Dr. Ben Carter, my second in command, was a brilliant young surgeon with a family to support. They had all dedicated their lives to me and my vision. They were the real victims of Arthur's nepotism, and I would not let them suffer. My revenge was not just about me. It was about ensuring they landed on their feet in a place where their loyalty and talent would be valued, not exploited. I also began to have hushed conversations with a few key members of the board, the ones who had been sympathetic to me in the past, the ones whose eyes had flickered with guilt in that fateful meeting. They didn't know my full plan, but I gave them just enough information to get them thinking. I spoke about the risks of having a less experienced head of department, the potential loss of research grants, and the fragile nature of patient trust. I planted the seeds of doubt, knowing that they would grow into a harvest of skepticism. The day I finally decided to make my move, the cold anger gave way to a steely resolve. I had all the pieces in place. I had my detailed report, my plan for a new surgical center, and a quiet network of allies within and outside the hospital. I walked into the hospital that morning, the woman who had walked out of the boardroom a few weeks ago, but a woman transformed. I was no longer a victim. I was a soldier, walking onto the field of a war I had declared on my own terms. My final act before the climax was a simple, yet symbolic one. I took the patient file for Lily, the little girl whose surgery I had canceled. I walked into Charlotte's office, where she was fumbling with a quarterly report. "This is Lily," I said, placing the file on her desk. "She needs a heart valve repair. She's a high-risk patient. A few weeks ago, I had the surgery scheduled." Charlotte looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't understand, Amy." "You're the head of the department now, Charlotte. You're in charge of the schedule." "I'm simply asking when you'll be doing her surgery." Charlotte's face paled. She looked at me, then at the file, then back at me. She was a general surgeon, not a specialist. She had no idea how to handle a pediatric heart valve repair. I'll have Ben handle it," she stammered, her voice shaking. Ben, my second in command, was good, but not good enough for this case. I smiled, a cold, empty smile that held no warmth. "Ben is on vacation, Charlotte. You know that. And the family specifically requested me." Charlotte swallowed hard, her eyes pleading. I'll just tell them you're busy, and I'll find another surgeon." I shook my head, my smile never wavering. "No, Charlotte. You'll handle it. You're the head of the department now. You're supposed to be in charge." The terror in her eyes was a sweet, bitter victory. She was finally starting to realize the impossible burden her father had placed on her shoulders. I turned and walked away. My final act of mentoring complete. I knew that the dominoes had begun to fall. The following morning, I walked into the hospital with an envelope in my hand. It was pristine, heavy, and held the culmination of my quiet, furious planning. I carried it not just as a letter, but as a weapon. I had dressed with care, choosing my most professional navy blue suit, the one that always made me feel like an impenetrable fortress of competence. This was not a day for tears or shouting. It was a day for cold, surgical precision. I made my way to Arthur's office. His secretary, Marie, a kind, older woman who had always treated me like a daughter, looked up with a strained smile. "Morning, Dr. Chen. Is everything okay?" I met her gaze and smiled, a genuine, albeit sad, smile. "Everything will be just fine, Marie. I'm here to see Arthur." She gestured towards the door, a silent concern in her eyes. She had known the dynamics of this family and this hospital for decades. She had seen the writing on the wall long before I did. Arthur's door was ajar, and I could hear his booming laugh. He was on the phone, his voice full of jovial self-importance. I knocked once on the doorframe, and he looked up, his smile fading slightly when he saw me. "Amy, come in, come in. Just closing a deal with the new supply chain partner." He hung up the phone and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "To what do I owe this pleasure? Things are going well with Charlotte, I trust?" I didn't sit. I walked to his desk and placed the envelope in the center, directly on top of his mahogany-stained blotter. The envelope was thick, not like a simple one-page letter. He looked at it, then at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What's this, Amy? A report on Lily's case? Charlotte was just telling me about it. She's worried about finding the right surgeon." "No, Arthur," I said, my voice as steady as my hands had ever been in an operating room. "That's my formal notice of resignation." The words hung in the air, a final and absolute cut. Arthur's face went from confusion to disbelief. He laughed, a short, sharp sound full of condescension. "Resignation? Amy, you can't be serious. Is this about the promotion? I told you, we'll find another place for you, a different title, a new position on the board, your family." He reached for the envelope, a dismissive wave of his hand. He believed this was a tantrum, a negotiation tactic. He tore open the envelope and pulled out the contents. It wasn't a single page. It was a thick, bound report with a professional cover page. Comprehensive review of the Pediatric Surgical Department and strategic proposal for Dr. Amelia Chen. He skimmed the first page, his brow furrowing as he saw the meticulous data, the bullet points, the charts. "What is all this, Amy?" he demanded, his voice losing its playful edge. "This isn't a resignation letter. This is a book." "Read the last page, Arthur," I instructed, my voice calm but absolute. "You'll find my official resignation there." He flipped to the last page, his eyes scanning the simple, cold lines of my notice. Then, his eyes traveled back to the preceding pages. He read on, his face draining of color with each sentence. I watched his expression shift, from anger to confusion to a dawning, sickening realization. The color in his face turned from pale to a flushed red. His fingers trembled as they held the report. He read about my proprietary surgical technique, which I had developed and protected with multiple patents. He read about my detailed analysis of the pediatric surgical team, with each member's contributions and specialties outlined. He read the shocking truth. I was taking the entire team with me. The best surgeons, the most skilled nurses, the most dedicated support staff, all of them had agreed to join my new venture, a state-of-the-art private surgical center specializing in pediatric care. Then he got to the financial projections. He saw the numbers, the grants I had secured, the private investors I had courted, the contracts I had negotiated with major insurance providers. He saw the name of the new surgical center, the Chen Vance Institute for Pediatric Innovation. My name, his name, a final, ironic twist of the knife, cementing his family's name to my success, whether he liked it or not. His eyes finally met mine, and the laughter was completely gone. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. You can't be serious. You've planned this? For how long?" he stammered, his voice a whisper. "This is my research. This is my hospital. This is my family." "No, Arthur," I said, a slow, triumphant smile finally breaking through. "This is my research. I developed it. I hold the patents. And this is my team. I trained them. I earned their loyalty. And this is my resignation, as a surgeon, as a daughter, and as an employee. Your family's name will be on the building, but the heart of that institute, the brains, the hands, will all be mine. You asked for my final report. That's what you're holding." He sank back into his chair, the report falling from his trembling hands and scattering across his desk. He looked every one of his 63 years, his shoulders slumped, his eyes haunted. "What about Charlotte? She's not ready to handle the department alone. We can't handle Lily's case without you." "That's no longer my problem, Arthur," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You chose to sacrifice a thriving department for your daughter's marriage. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences." I turned and walked out, leaving him alone in the silence of his office, surrounded by the shattered pieces of his arrogance. The applause had died. The laughter had vanished. And for the first time in his life, Arthur Vance had absolutely nothing to say. The silence in Arthur's office was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It followed me down the corridor, a quiet symphony of his shattered ego. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking against the marble floor, a drumbeat of my newfound freedom. I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years, as if the weight of my father-in-law's expectations and my own misplaced loyalty had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Marie, Arthur's secretary, looked up as I passed, her expression a mix of awe and concern. She had heard the raised voice, the sudden quiet. I just smiled at her, a real smile this time, and said, It's all in the report, Marie. He'll need a new coffee maker, too. I think he might have thrown his old one at the wall. The news of my resignation spread through the hospital faster than a flu virus. Whispers turned into hushed conversations, and then into open panic. I walked back to my office, and within minutes, my phone began to buzz with a relentless urgency. It was Leo. I let it ring. He was calling not as my husband, but as a crisis manager. He had to be dealing with his father's wrath and the fallout of my decision. The world was no longer my perfectly orchestrated ballet. It was a domino effect I had set in motion, and I was watching, calm and detached, as the pieces fell. My team was the first to gather. They came to my office one by one, a group of brilliant, exhausted people who had dedicated their lives to me and my vision. Ben, my right-hand surgeon, walked in first, his face a grim mask. "Amy, is it true? I just heard you resigned." I nodded. "I did, but I didn't do it alone." I handed him a copy of my final report. Read the last section, the one about the new surgical center. He read it, his eyes widening with each word. This is incredible. You've been planning this?" "For weeks," I admitted, "ever since I knew." Soon, the entire team was in my office. Maria, my head nurse, Dr. Alana Shaw, our brilliant anesthesiologist, and the rest of our dedicated surgical staff. I laid out the plan for them, my new institute, the funding I had secured, the state-of-the-art facility we would build. I offered them all positions, a chance to be part of something where their talent, not their last name, would determine their future. Maria started to cry, her relief a palpable thing in the room. "I was so worried, Amy. When I saw what they did to you, I didn't know what would happen to us, to my son's college fund." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You'll be better compensated than you ever were here, Maria. Your loyalty means more to me than any title." Ben, ever the pragmatist, looked at me with a newfound respect. "You were just waiting for the right moment, weren't you? You saw the betrayal, and instead of a tantrum, you built an entire new world for us." I just smiled. A good surgeon never operates without a plan, and a good leader never abandons their team. The dominoes continued to fall. Later that day, the hospital's PR team scrambled to issue a statement. My resignation was framed as a personal decision due to family matters, but no one in the medical community bought it. The whispers turned into an audible roar. How could Arthur Vance, a man who preached about legacy and family values, let his most talented surgeon, his own daughter-in-law, walk away? The board was in an emergency meeting, and Leo, my husband, was no doubt at the center of the storm. I finally picked up my phone to call him back. "Amelia, what did you do?" he asked. His voice strained with a kind of desperate, impotent fury. "You can't just leave. You're destroying the hospital. Dad is having a meltdown." I took a deep breath. "No, Leo, I'm not destroying the hospital. I'm leaving a broken system. Your father made his choice when he chose to reward mediocrity over merit, and you stood by and let him do it. This isn't my mess. It's yours." "But what about us?" he pleaded, the first hint of genuine fear in his voice. "We're a team. Remember? A team!" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "A team of two, where one person does all the work and the other gets all the credit? That's not a team, Leo. That's a partnership of convenience, and I'm no longer convenient." I hung up the phone before he could respond, leaving him to face the full weight of the silence I had left behind. The next day, a different kind of call came. It was from a reporter for a prominent medical journal, one I had published in many times. She had heard the gossip and wanted to hear my side of the story. I told her the truth, but with a calculated elegance that was far more damning than a simple angry outburst. I spoke about the importance of meritocracy in medicine, the dangers of nepotism in a field where lives are at stake, and my profound belief that innovation should always be rewarded. I never mentioned Charlotte's name or her troubled marriage. My revenge was not about her. It was about the system that had allowed her to fail upwards at my expense. The article that followed was a firestorm. It didn't just report on my resignation. It questioned the very ethics of Vance Medical Center. The grants I had secured were put on hold. Key donors who had invested in my research began to pull out. Patients who had been referred to the hospital specifically to be treated by me started demanding transfers. The hospital's reputation, once an impenetrable fortress, began to crumble, and Charlotte, the newly appointed head of department, was at the very epicenter of the implosion. Her first major test was Lily's case, the heart valve repair I had told her to handle. I heard about the outcome from Maria, who still had friends in the hospital. Charlotte, overwhelmed and underqualified, had fumbled the surgery. The patient was stable, but the procedure was botched, and the little girl would require another, even riskier, surgery. The family, naturally, was furious. They sued the hospital, and Charlotte was now facing not just a professional failure, but a legal nightmare. The irony was exquisite. Arthur had sacrificed my career to save his daughter's marriage. Now, in his desperate attempt to give her a career, he had destroyed both her and his hospital's reputation. The final confrontation came a week later, when Arthur himself came to my new, temporary office. It was a humble, functional space, but it was filled with the promise of my future. He looked haggard, a man a decade older than he had been in his office just days before. He sat across from me, a broken, defeated man. "Amy, please," he said, his voice a low, raspy plea. "This has gone too far. We can't handle this. The board is talking about a vote of no confidence. Lily's family is suing us for millions. My hospital is falling apart." "I told you all of this would happen in my final report, Arthur," I said, my voice calm. "You didn't believe me." "I was wrong," he admitted, the words a bitter confession. "I was a fool. I should have given you the promotion you deserved. It's not too late. Come back. The position is yours. We'll tell everyone there was a misunderstanding. We'll make it right." I looked at him, at the man who had been my mentor, my father-in-law, and the architect of my greatest betrayal. And I felt nothing. No anger, no desire for victory, just a quiet, profound emptiness. "You're right, Arthur," I said, standing up. "It is too late. My loyalty is to my patients and my team team is with me. We're building something new, something better. We are no longer part of your family. My partnership with Leo is over, and my connection to this hospital is severed. You wanted to save your family? You just burned the bridge that was your only way out. So now, you will have to reap what you have sown." I watched him go, a shrunken, pathetic figure. My revenge wasn't a single action. It was a consequence. A natural law of cause and effect. He had prioritized family over merit, and now his family, his legacy, and his hospital were paying the ultimate price. I hadn't destroyed him. He had destroyed himself, and all I had done was stand back and let the truth take its course. The months that followed were a whirlwind of construction, hiring, and the exhilarating chaos of building something from the ground up. My team, my real team, was by my side, their faces a mirror of my own quiet determination. We found a small, functional space in a developing part of the city and began to transform it. We painted walls, assembled furniture, and installed the state-of-the-art equipment that my investors had funded. The new surgical center, officially named the Chen Institute for Pediatric Innovation, was not just a hospital. It was a sanctuary built on the principles of merit, talent, and shared purpose. It was in those frantic, early days that my old life truly fell away. I finalized my divorce from Leo. It was a quiet, amicable process. There was no bitter fighting, only the acknowledgement of an irreparable break. Leo, to his credit, seemed to understand. He was a man who had chosen to stand by his family's legacy, and in doing so, he had lost the one person who truly believed in him. Our last conversation was simple. "I'm sorry, Amy," he said, his voice tinged with a regret that felt genuine. "I should have stood up for you." "You should have stood up for yourself, Leo," I replied, and with that, our chapter was closed. I had to let him go, not out of anger, but out of a need to finally be free. The Chen Institute opened its doors 6 months after I resigned from Vance Medical Center. Our first patient was not a family member or a political ally, but a little boy named Sam who needed a complex liver transplant. He was a perfect example of what my new hospital was all about, a patient in need of an expert, not a political pawn. The surgery was a resounding success. My team, my family, had never been more focused, more united, or more proud. We had proven that true excellence isn't found in a famous last name or a marble-etched legacy. It's found in the hands that heal, the minds that innovate, and the hearts that care. News of our success traveled fast. The medical community, once captivated by the drama of my departure, was now enthralled by the miracle of my success. My groundbreaking surgical method, which Arthur had dismissed in favor of a nepotistic appointment, was now being hailed as a major breakthrough. We were featured in medical journals, on the nightly news, and in a prestigious documentary series about medical pioneers. I wasn't just a surgeon anymore. I was a leader, a visionary, and a beacon of hope for a new generation of doctors who believed in the power of merit over connections. The most profound change, however, was in me. The woman who had once smiled politely through humiliation and swallowed every disappointment was gone. In her place was a person of quiet confidence, a leader who didn't demand respect, but earned it. I learned that my self-worth wasn't tied to a title or a last name. It was built on the foundation of my own hard work, my own integrity, and the loyalty of the people I had chosen to stand by. The betrayal had not broken me. It had forged me into someone stronger, someone more resilient, and someone who finally understood the true meaning of power. The final act of my story came a year later at a prestigious medical awards gala. I was there not as a guest, but as a nominee for the Innovation in Pediatric Care Award. The ballroom was filled with the brightest minds in medicine, and as I walked in, I was greeted with handshakes, applause, and genuine smiles. My team was there, cheering me on. Across the room, I saw them. Charlotte and Arthur. They were sitting at a table in the back, a quiet, somber pair. Vance Medical Center had been a shadow of its former self. Many of the top surgeons had left, and the hospital's reputation had been severely damaged. Lily's botched surgery had been the final nail in the coffin, leading to a massive lawsuit that had crippled their finances and their credibility. When my name was announced as the winner, the entire room erupted. As I walked to the stage, I saw Arthur's eyes meet mine. There was no anger, no laughter, just a quiet, profound devastation. He had lost, not just a hospital, but his legacy, his pride, and his vision. I took the award, a beautiful, shining crystal sculpture, and stood before the microphone. I didn't speak about the award. I spoke about the journey. "This award isn't just for me," I began, my voice clear and steady. "It's for my team, the people who believed in the power of innovation, even when the system told us we were wrong. It's for the patient who deserves the best care, not the politically convenient care. And it's for every woman, every doctor, every professional who has ever been told that their passion, their talent, and their hard work are less valuable than someone else's last name or a family's emotional needs. My eyes found Charlotte's. She looked away, tears streaming down her face. To anyone who has ever felt overlooked or undervalued, I continued, remember this. Your worth is not a gift to be given by someone else. It is a fire that burns within you. Don't let anyone else put it out. Your greatest strength isn't in fighting the battles of others. It's in building a legacy of your own. I walked off the stage, holding the award that felt surprisingly light in my hands. Arthur met me on the side of the stage. He said nothing, but his eyes were full of a silent, desperate plea. I'm sorry, he whispered, a broken man. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't need to respond. My new life, my new team, my new legacy, it was all the response he would ever get. My revenge wasn't a punishment, it was a lesson, a testament to the fact that integrity, talent, and hard work will always triumph over politics and privilege. I had healed myself, my team, and the patients who came after. That was the ultimate victory. If Amelia's story of betrayal and triumph resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you could give this video a like. For me, the most powerful moment was when Amelia walked away, knowing that her silence was more powerful than any argument. What about you? What moment in the story left the biggest impression on you? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to follow more inspiring stories like this, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon so you don't miss any of our videos. Thank you.